Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I am Akona, a Nigerian living and studying in Japan. So guys, after I made this last video about getting admission into Japan universities and about schooling in Japan in general, I got some questions. People were asking me, how about bringing my family, my kids? Is there something I should know? How does all that work and the rest of it? So in this video, I'll be giving some tips here and there on things you should know beforehand when planning to bring your family, especially with regards to children, to Japan. So stay tuned, especially if you know this will be useful to you or you know someone who's planning to move to Japan with their kids. This is very important. Coming from someone who has kids in Japan, you better listen to me. So guys, let's get into it. So first things first, the official language in Japan is Japanese. I have to keep saying this because I have realized that a lot of people actually have this shock when they come here and notice that the official language is not English. I mean, it's understandable considering that Japan is among the G7 countries. So you would expect that probably they would communicate more in English and the rest of it. But no, they hold their culture in high esteem. They're trying to preserve their culture, their tradition, and their language is part of that. So Japanese language is the official language. But that doesn't mean you wouldn't see the translations of some things in English language. You will see most of the times. But for many documents you will receive, they're going to be mainly in Japanese, except probably school documents, they're going to be in English. Few school documents. So let's get into it. So for bringing your dependents, I think this is at the discretion of the consulate or the embassy issuing the visas. But one thing that I can say to a certain extent is that if you have a scholarship, it's much easier to bring your family. There are people that bring in their family a month, 2 months after they've moved here. So it doesn't really take so much time. For example, if you come under the MEST scholarship, JICA, JSPS, and the rest of it. So it's easier when you have such backing because it is important to prove to the government they have enough funding and you're not going to be a liability or your family will not be a liability to the country. So that is why it is important to have sufficient funds to be able to bring your family. So that is what I would say with regard to bringing your family. It is solely at the discretion of the consulate. But if you have a scholarship, you're most likely to have an easier pass bringing them here. But if you're not a student, please still hold on, don't go anywhere. This is beyond being a student. So on to the next thing. So people will typically ask me, what is it like raising kids in Japan? Is it expensive and the rest of it? Let us take it one step at a time. So starting with schooling, I would have to emphasize again, in Japan, the fiscal year starts in April. And for things like elementary, kindergarten, nursery schools, they follow this rule, but it's much flexible than the university and probably the high school. In this case, your child can resume school probably anytime they arrive, but with much difficulty if it's not before the school year resumes. Like if you come into Japan for a session that starts, let's say in April, and you're expected to arrive in Japan by the end of March, by that end of March, most schools have closed admission. It makes a lot of sense because school applications typically starts around probably November, December of the previous year to get into kindergarten or nursery. But in most cases, you might be lucky to have nursery schools that still have 1 or 2 vacancies and they can take in your child. And actually, given the declining population in Japan, most schools are becoming vacant. If you check the internet, you will realize that most schools are closing down. And I mean, from nursery to kindergarten to elementary, they are closing down because they don't have so much pupils. So in probably 7 out of 10 times, you would have a school that would have a vacancy. The only problem is that this school may not be close to your home. So that's all you have to do is head to your ward office, inform them you just arrived, your child is at this age, they need to get into school, and then they refer you and show you schools that are close to you. That's usually the standard. They'll show you schools that are close to you. But if there are no vacancies, they will show you schools that are, probably far away from you based on distance. So just let's leave that there. If you have a child who is probably in elementary school, I'm not sure how easy that would be getting into school in the middle of the year. For instance, if you come to Japan around May, June, when the school resumed in April, so they're going to probably find this a bit difficult to get in and catch up. But of course, you might have to do a lot of work at home behind the scenes to push your child, to get into that. And still on school, people would typically say, you say Japan is not an English speaking country. So does it mean all schools are Japanese schools? No, you have a few international schools here and there, but the thing is that it's the prices are not the same. So most international schools are actually expensive, which is, I mean, for obvious reasons, than Japanese schools. So you would have to also consider if you feel like Japan international schools is best for your child, fine. Because honestly, I wouldn't really lie. I feel sad when I see kids, who are probably 10, 8, 9, who have, learned a different language during these formative years, and then they are hit with the shock of a new language, and especially when it has to be with education. It's not like you come in with a child of a year or 2 years, and the child has to take time, learn and the rest of it. This is someone who has probably completed 3 or 4 years uh, in education, and then now you just hit them with this. So if you're going to come with kids who have probably grown, it's important that they learn the language. If you know you're going to come to Japan in April, you could probably start 6 months, 5 months ahead. Luckily, kids learn very fast, so they are most likely to learn reasonably before they get into Japan. So if you have, there are many resources, tools online you could find. Expose them to the language, let them get used to it. Watch as many Japanese, probably, what do you call it? Cartoons, kids shows, educational things. You would find them online, and then let them get used to the language so it doesn't hit them hard. Like I said, I actually feel sad for kids who have this shock when they come. It takes them a while. I mean, these are kids whose brains have, formed properly. They've made friends back home. They've learned a lot of things. They know the English alphabet or whatever country's alphabets, and then now you expose them to kanji, katakana, hiragana, three different characters that are more than 2,100. So that's a lot of work. I actually feel bad for kids, but that doesn't mean this shouldn't discourage you. I just like to be honest, so all the cards on the table, you know what you're likely to meet. Well, of course, there are international schools. They're also lifesavers for people who feel like they can't really settle in at first. You still have that option. And one other important thing to note is that if your child is going to get into the kindergarten, elementary, and high school, their birthday is very important. I mean, I think this is the funniest part and one of the culture shocks I experienced coming to Japan. So let's take this scenario. Like I mentioned in the last video, the fiscal year starts in April. Okay, let's take this scenario. If your child was born in 2018, that means your child will be 6 this year, right? Yes. So let's assume your child was born in February. Perfect, fine. When the child comes into Japan, they'll start during the April calendar, whatever set age for the class is. So if your child is 6, they'll be getting into elementary school by then. If your child is 3, they'll be getting into kindergarten. If your child is 12, they'll be getting into high school, junior high school. So that's how it works. But if your child was born on April 1, April 2, April 3, until whatever. Okay, let's just take April for example. If your child was born on April 1, 2, 3, your child is going to spend 1 year behind his or her peers, because once you were not born by March 31st of the previous fiscal year, you cannot get into the new class for those that are your age. So it doesn't matter that you're clocking 6 on April 1 or April 2. As long as you're not with no clock 6 by March 31st, you'll be 1 year behind your peers. So it's very sad. I mean, I don't want to talk too much, but I've experienced someone whose child was born on April 2nd, 2 days later, and now the child is 1 year behind her peers. So that's something that is very interesting. It doesn't happen in Nigeria that way. So it was really a big shock to me when I got here. So well, of course, if your child is born later in the year, you may not feel so bad. But if you are born in April, May, June, you might feel just 3 months difference. Why is this happening? And the rest of it. So you have to bear that in mind. Your birthday determines, what class you're going to be in, and not just the birthday. The month you are born in actually determines that. So in Nigeria, our school calendar starts in September. So typically, if you are born in that year, you're free to get into school in September. But it doesn't really happen like that in Japan. And then the next thing is cost. Very important. Monitors the cost of schooling. So for elementary schools, or let's say from 0 to 12, yeah, that's from nursery, what they call hoikuen here, to kindergarten, which they call yochien, to elementary school, which is shogako, the prices are relatively fair, but everything is based on your income. So for the nursery and the kindergarten, everything will be determined based on your income, and then they'll give you fees are paid monthly. This is under culture shock. Back in Nigeria, we pay our fees termly, and we have 3 terms in a year. But here we have to pay monthly. It took me a while to get used to that. So you have to pay the fees monthly. And yeah, this is going to be calculated based on your income, like I mentioned. So if you're a low income household, you're most likely to be in the range of zero to probably a few thousands. But if you're in a high or middle income household, of course, the price would increase. So that's how the whole thing basically works. So you just have to bear that in mind. There is no fixed amount. It's not like, oh, school is free for every child 0 to 6, like in some countries. No, it doesn't work like that. It depends on your income. And then in elementary schools, I can't really confirm, but I heard that probably in the whole of Japan, I'm not so sure, don't hold me to this, but from people that I've communicated with, tuition itself is free in elementary school, but things like school lunch, books, uniforms, and the rest of it. Most schools don't wear uniforms. In Japan, most schools don't wear uniforms actually. A few schools do, but very rarely. You have to pay for all these other necessities, but the tuition itself is free. So you have to take that up with your ward or your prefecture. You just have to bear that in mind. And then another thing people want to know is cost of childbirth. I know that in some countries like in Europe, childbirth is basically free. Everything you have, healthcare is cheap, and the rest of it, some of you guys are enjoying there. But in Japan, childbirth is calculated. The money you pay is still based on your income. But one important thing you should do once you get to Japan is to get the health insurance. So you can just, mostly people would apply to the national health insurance, which is covered by Japan government. But others, depending on your workplace, they may have some on their own personal or private health insurance companies. But do not forget to get a health insurance. Healthcare is not cheap, guys. Healthcare is not cheap. But of course, cannot be compared to some countries that I know that healthcare is very expensive. So healthcare is relatively affordable, relatively, depending on if you have an insurance. If you have an insurance, the government pays 70% for you and you pay 30%. So if you have kids, you don't want to gamble this. If you have an underlying disease, you don't want to gamble this. You need to get a health insurance. So that brings me to the cost of childbirth. People would say, is it cheap? I can't really say it's cheap. I mean, I once made a video where I talked about the cost of childbirth. For me, it wasn't cheap. It was quite expensive. But I've had people who had their babies here, like 2, 3, 4 babies, and they didn't pay a dime. So it all depends on your income. So there's a way they calculate the whole thing. I mean, you might even have similar situations to this person, and yet the prices will still differ. So I'll show you guys. I think I still have that hospital bill and the rest of it. I'll show you guys how much it costs. It was over 700,000 yen then. So yeah, that's how it is. Everything is dependent on your income. In some prefectures, the government even pays the hospital bills, and then they give you whatever is left. They call it the lump sum child birth benefit, something like that. So it depends on your prefecture. So if you're already in Japan and this is your first time hearing about that, you might want to inquire. So this is usually what you apply for when you're 7 months gone. If you're going to have your baby in November, this is the right time to apply. So but just pick it up with your ward office and see what they have to say. I think these are the basics, the very important details. So I'd like to add, a little more things here and there. So when it comes to things like culture, Japan is a very homogeneous community. I think most people know that. And they're a very disciplined community. I give it to them. I mean, somebody would say after living in Japan, it's difficult to live elsewhere. And for me, having traveled, across continents, I would say the person wasn't lying. Well, it's not entirely 100% true, but there are chances you would find probably some other places. You find a lot of shortcomings in other places than you would do in Japan, because Japan has this very good image, and I mean the society is functional. Things are prim, proper, everyone is in order, things move very smoothly. I mean, when I was in the US, I felt like Japan really spoiled me because everything is convenient in Japan, and in the US, I had to struggle a bit, especially with things like transportation. And in the US, I didn't have a car. In Japan, I don't have a car, but the transportation system is seamless. It's one of the best I've seen across my travels. So I would really give it to Japan when it comes to convenience. They spoil you with convenience. You go from adulthood to infanthood, and you don't just want to grow up again. So yes, I give it to them for that. So with regards to that, you just have to be respectful of the culture. People are generally nice for the most part. I've met very nice people. So people are generally kind. It's just that probably due to language barrier, the interaction may not be as much as you want. And then they are not the social butterflies. So definitely, they may not, if you're an extroverted person, you may not really fit in. Because of course, they are extroverted Japanese. Like I have one extroverted Japanese that I know now, and I'm always happy to have conversations with the person, even though I'm not particularly an extrovert. But at least it's better than being a very, better than being very introverted in a quiet country. Yeah, so that's of course they have. It's not a monolithic view. There are still a few persons who are extroverted, but yeah, just a very tiny percentage compared to the rest of the population. So just bear that in mind. Be respectful of the culture. People here are generally respectful. I mean, they give kids, animals, adults respect. It's very important. Japan is also a hierarchy-based country, so age is very important. So you have to be respectful of these things. We don't call people by their names. We attach san is a honorific title. You say like in my case, people will call me Akuna san, and if I'm a child, they'll say Akuna Chan. If I'm a boy, they'll say Akuna Kun. And then Chan is basically a term of endearment. So people can even use it for boys or for girls, depending on how you care about the child or if the child is fond of you. Yes, you can use Chan for male and female. Then the next thing is about the cost of living. It's not something I can really break down now. I also have a video on the cost of living in Japan. Do well to check that out, although things have changed. So I think I will do an updated version. If you would like to see an updated version of the cost of living in Japan, please let me know in the comment section. I'm likely to do an updated version because things have really changed. I mean, with the inflation and everything, prices are skyrocketing. I think it's basically a worldwide issue now, but the Japanese yen has been struggling, so it's beginning to affect a lot of things. So I'm not going to talk so much about that in this case. But in the case of things like food and the rest of it, like I said, Japanese is not a diverse country, so to say. It's a very homogeneous culture, so you're likely going to find basically Japanese meals. But of course, you see some country dishes here and there, some restaurants, especially things like Indian restaurants are there, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Yeah, so you'll find these restaurants. If you live in a not so popular state, you're most likely not to find African restaurants or stores. Like for me, I live in a place called Miyagi, and I have to order from Tokyo. That's where I order African items from, like our gari, our black eyed beans, our palm oil, our fish, melon, things like that. I order it from Tokyo, and Tokyo is about 5 hours drive away from me, or 1 hour 30 minutes by the bullet train. But of course, thank God things are easier these days than in our parents' days. You just order online and then they deliver it to you the next day. And so I don't have a problem with that so much. But of course, I would love to walk into an African restaurant. I think that's something I like about the US. In the US, you have African restaurants, and then you have a much bigger community of Africans in the US than I see here, especially in where I live. So things like that. I'm going to emphasize on that. But if you're probably from Asia, I think you might find most things you're looking for than those of us who come from probably Africa, because most of our things are not popular here. People, if you show them some pictures, what's this? They are curious and blank at the same time because they have no idea what that is. For people who like to do makeup, please come with your makeup, or if you have an online store where you order, better for you. I'm not a makeup fan, so yeah, makeup is not really so much of a big deal to me. I don't I'm not bothered about seeing makeup stores or the rest. But you just have to bear in mind also things like clothing. If you're tall, like me, you will find it difficult to find your size. There is no sugarcoating this. It is not easy finding our sizes. I'm 5 feet 11, so it is very difficult to find my size in most cases. And then if you have a big body like mine, that's also another hurdle. So you just have to, bear that in mind. This is just me trying to be playing with you guys, giving you all the heads up if you're coming, just so you're aware of these things. So basically, food, clothing, makeup, things you feel like you need, just make sure you plan ahead of time. Of course, you can't have everything. Something will definitely run out. Just plan as much as you can, and then when you get into the country, try to figure out where to get things. Shops that are commonly owned by Pakistani, India, Bangladesh, they typically have some things that we Africans use. I think they have similar taste buds like they do, and we have a lot of similarities that I got to figure out when I got to Japan. So you would typically find some of these things in their stores. Some things, of course, not all spices, but some things you could work with in their stores compared to the regular Japanese local stores. So if you can just check that out if you're an African who's looking for where to get food and the rest of it. Just ask for halal stores around you, or check the internet for African stores around you. These stores will typically pop up. So that's that. And then our hair. That's where, oh God, I'm still struggling. This is 6 years later, but it's been a big struggle. I think some of you have seen my video also where I was making my hair by myself. I've been making my hair for the past 4 years. So in 4 years, I've had my hair made by someone just about 4 times. Yes. So typically I make my hair probably in a year, make my hair 4 times by myself, and then visit someone who knows how to make around me once. Things like that. Yeah. So just bear that in mind. If you need to get your hair relaxed and the rest of it, come with your relaxer. Maybe find a friend who can help you do that. Their salons do not really know so much about relaxing our Afro 4C hair. So just bear that in mind. Things that you need for your hair. Bear that in mind. And sometimes the weather can be harsh on our hair. Like before I came to Japan, I had relatively strong hair, but it has become stronger over the years. I think the weather hasn't been so friendly, so that's why I'm very scared to wear my hair out, because it dries so quickly and then it becomes serious trouble to comb it. And I have a very full hair, so it's a lot of energy trying to comb my hair. So just bear that in mind in case if you're like me who has full hair, thick hair, and then so just have that in mind. And then finally, just a tip I just remembered now. If you're planning to drive in Japan, it's good to have your driver's license. You cannot necessarily use the same license here, but it makes you skip some steps. So if you have, for example, a Nigerian driving license, when you get here, instead of going through the whole basics, do you know what the trafficator is? You know what the red light means and all those minor things, you would have to skip and then just go into eye test and then some written tests. But it's basically something you might have already known as a certified driver. But just come with the driver's license, it makes you skip a lot of steps, and then you just take the small exam, eye test. If you pass it, driving test, and then you get your driver's license. So that's just something you just bear in mind in case you're planning to drive in Japan. But the transportation system is seamless. But of course, once in a while, you might need a car to drive around because of emergencies or sightseeing and the rest of it. So that's it from me, guys. If you have any questions about living in Japan, things I have missed, and just leave them in the comment section. I'll do my best to reply to them. If it's a bulky topic, I'll do another video about it. But for the updated cost of living, I think I'll give you guys an updated cost. It's necessary. So guys, don't forget to hit the like button, share this video, subscribe. Subscribe is very important. I trust you guys. And please tell people who you know are interested in coming to Japan, just so they're well informed. I'm just giving you guys the whole truth, the way it is, so that people have all this information and help them make very good decisions. So guys, don't forget to hit the like button. Until the next video, bye.